What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And today I'm going to talk about grief. If it's your first time here, check out the content, man. It's a little bit different than what you might expect. Subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, etc. And so the reason I want to talk about grief, it's something that everybody deals with at some point in time. But also recently, I had an encounter with grief that kind of threw me off a little bit. And so I thought I'd share with you guys what that situation was and my reaction and some lessons that I learned from it. And so a young person I know, I get a call last week from my mother, and she is frantic on the phone, right? She's yelling, she's crying, she's hyper emotional. And she's telling me that this young person I know died. It's not entirely clear. It could have been that he passed from an overdose. It could have been that he passed from some other medical condition. The autopsy results aren't in yet. But nonetheless, he was a kid, a young guy, young adult, and he unexpectedly passed away. And I've known this young man since he was little. He wound up getting caught up in the street life and run around with Northerners, which kind of surprised me because that's not the family background he comes from. He comes from a family background of folks that have been in some trouble too, but that's not who they ran with. And I don't feel like I had any direct involvement. I didn't encourage it. He witnessed me engaging in that lifestyle, at various points off and on in his life, but it certainly wasn't something that I encouraged or condoned, or that I frankly even saw, the signs of happening. And then, I go off to prison and I come back and I, reconnect with him. I see him and, he's running around the streets and I kind of let him do his thing, right? So he wound up having some substance issues and he went in recovery. And we had talked a few days prior to him passing about his sobriety, about a benchmark in his sobriety, about my own sobriety. If you're not familiar with my story, I'll link a video to when I talked about my journey to and from alcoholism. But so anyways, he was a cool kid, and he was on an upward path. And so I get this call, it's a shock. And I'm like, okay, and I hung up the phone and I tell my old lady, hey man, so-and-so died. And she's not quite sure who he is. I kind of fill her in a little bit, but I notice my attitude is very nonchalant. I'm not very emotional about it. And in fact, I don't think I was, at the time, I didn't think I was grieving at all. And that kind of bothered me. I sat with that. I called my brother. I've experienced a lot of death in my lifetime. I'll be 45 next month. And I've experienced a lot of death. And I know a lot of people watching this have as well. And in particular, when you're living a street lifestyle and you're kind of caught up in things, then you witness a lot more than a human should. And so, and even in recent time, I had a homeboy killed outside of Tesla. That one kind of hit me for a minute, over there in Fremont. I've had people die from the virus. I've had people die from overdoses recently. And so there's just a lot of death, man. There's a lot of death. And my ladies had some folks die. And so I started thinking, am I immune to grief? Am I just so used to it that the fact of somebody dying just doesn't affect me? And that kind of scared me because I don't want to be that guy. I'm actually a pretty emotional person, truth be told. And I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the person that disregards a loss of life, a premature loss of life, a sudden loss of life as just another day at the office. And it wasn't as if I didn't care about this kid and I didn't care about his family. Was he my best friend or whatever? No, but he wasn't some distant stranger. He wasn't some passing acquaintance that I met once upon a time. And I was really into, excuse me, I had particularly been communicating with him recently. And so that was sort of in my mind, not grieving for the youngster, but wondering what's wrong with me for not grieving. And so I started kind of looking around and I talked to some people that are smarter than me about stuff. And you know, they say numbness is the first stage of grief, right? When you look at the 7 stages of grief. Now, to be clear, I'm not actually a big fan of that. I think the 7 stages of grief can be misleading. For one, it gives the impression that it's a linear process, step by step, right? You start here, then here, then here. That you have to hit all of those stages and in that order. And then some people say, well, you hit all those stages, but not in that order. And then some people say, well, you kind of go up and down between different stages. And then maybe you don't hit any of those stages and you deal with it completely different. And so when there's that many interpretations, it to me, it strikes me as not very useful because it can mean anything or not mean anything to anybody. That's my take on it. That's not what this video is about, but a lot of people are familiar with it. And so the first one that's generally listed is like shock or numbness. But I wasn't feeling a shock. It wasn't like, wow, I can't believe it. I was surprised, but that wasn't resonating with me. You know, when my homeboy got killed at Tesla, that was shock. I was like, really? You know, that threw me off. There was some shock there. And, you know, my little brother's the most tragic loss of life that I've experienced by far. Roy Bennett, right? Speedy Roy Bennett, who was murdered in 1995 when he was almost 17 years old. And so in that instance, I reflected back and when I first heard, I was numb, completely numb. And as if it wasn't even real, but I wasn't processing that it wasn't real. I wasn't saying that to myself, but I was entirely numb. And that lasted a very brief period of time though, right? I mean, that didn't last a day. You know, that was just a moment, right? A little while where I was numb. And I remember I went outside and it was a nice day. And I looked up in the sky and I in my mind, I saw the clouds form his face and I broke, man. I broke. And I started tossing people that were coming around me to console me. And I was crying and I, you know, beat up a trash dumpster and I was inconsolable. And so I know that feeling, that's the most that I've had that feeling. But again, it was brief and it was followed by what you would expect, you know, the emotion that you would expect. So that didn't really stick with me. But in this case, it threw me. And so what I've realized is, and what I've come to understand is a few things. And some of the stuff I knew already, but there's a difference between knowing, like, how can you say it? Knowing in your mind, like logically knowing, right? Rationally knowing. And then really knowing in your heart, really internalizing that truth and coming to accept it. And those are two different levels of knowledge, two different levels of awareness that don't always line up. And so, and your brain does that, you know, that's kind of another story, but I know that people grieve differently. And that's been stated many times. There's tons of research, you know, everybody grieves a little bit different. There's not a right and a wrong way to grieve. Ideally, your grief does not lead you to hurt somebody or hurt yourself, of course. But beyond that, there's not a right or wrong way. The depth of grief that you display is not related to the depth of your relationship with the individual. You have people who a celebrity or a public figure dies that they may have never even met. And if they did, it was in passing. And they pass and they grieve, right? They grieve and they're emotional and whatnot. So their reaction is kind of disproportionate to their personal relationship with that person. You have people, you know, we see cases where kids go missing or whatever, and they always look at the mom and, oh, the mom's not grieving, right? You know, as a society, we kind of got this whole grief thing twisted. And we also live in a society where a lot of people think they know everything. And that's a part of it as well. And so how you grieve doesn't match, you know, doesn't necessarily line up with how you feel about the individual that you're grieving. The grief process takes a long time. It takes You know, it could take days, it could take hours, it could take weeks, it could take months. The one thing, if you're in, you know, in mourning or in grieving, and I know a lot of people are, especially with this bug going around, and please don't get into a political debate in the comments on this. I welcome interaction, I welcome conversation. I love it. I love the feedback from you guys. But I don't want to get distracted by that conversation. That's not what this is about. Just stating factually that people have been passing from this issue, and that's been touching a lot of families. And families that aren't living a lifestyle or predisposed, right, vulnerable to premature death. And so if you're grieving, the thing to watch out for, right, the thing to measure is it getting slightly better? And it doesn't have to be big steps. It's probably not going to be big steps. But a month after the loss, are you exactly the same that you were the day after the loss? Or are you a little bit more healed? And sometimes you can be fully healed, so to speak. And other times you're an inch away from where you were, but that inch counts, right? And it shows that your body, you know, your brain is processing it. So that's important. Nobody becomes immune to grief, right? And with very, very rare exception. And I know early on in therapy, when I was a child, I was in court-ordered play therapy and other therapy, and I grew up traumatized, right? It is what it is. And at one point they said, oh, he's a sociopath, right? He's showing sociopathic tendencies. And I was just a little child, and it's not like I was running around cutting animals' heads off. So, you know, I was just a kid, but I appeared to be numb. I appeared to not be deterred by consequences. I didn't operate with a lot of fear that was visible. I just didn't care, and I was with whatever. And I put myself in a lot of situations that adults couldn't understand. But to me, it was fine and it was normal. I'm not a sociopath, right? I got some screws loose up there for a variety of reasons, but I'm not a sociopath. And if you ever question your grief or question the appropriateness of your grief, that is a surefire sign that you are not immune to grief, even though you may feel numb. Because the fact that you recognize that it seems abnormal, which it is not, but the fact that you think that is a demonstration of your emotional consciousness. And so there's nothing wrong with you. You're not flawed. There's nothing wrong with me in that regard. We react different to loss in different ways. Sometimes, like in my brother's case, you can be numb and then just blow up. Other times you feel kind of numb and you sort of stay that way. And you get to a point to where life moves on as normal. I would encourage people, don't take steps to try to feel more than what you're feeling, right? Man, I'm, you know, my friend passed or a parent passed or whatever, and I love them, and I'm just not able to get the feeling, but I need to get the feeling out, and I want to get the feeling out. So I'm going to listen to music that we used to listen to, or I'm going to look at pictures, or I'm going to put myself in situations to trigger memories in the hopes that triggers the emotion that I think is appropriate. And not necessarily I think is appropriate because others are watching me. Maybe that's a factor, but that I think is appropriate because I'm really hurt that this person is gone and I need a way to show that. That's dangerous. It's not healthy for you to do that. It's not unusual. I've done that as well. I actually do that in terms of my brother sometimes now. I will, I'll be missing him and I'll play music that I know will make me emotional. And I don't do it necessarily to get a reaction, but I do it because I want to sit in that space a little bit. And I don't regret that. Um, and so, you got to decide what works for you, but it is unhealthy to try to advance how you're dealing with grief prematurely. Your body is responding how it is for a reason. Your brain's primary interest is survival of you. That is the number one thing your brain cares about. What does it take for you to survive? And not the you that you see yourself as, right? Not this healthy you or whatever. It's there's no this version of you. It's you, physically your body, right? Your limbs, your nerves, your organs. Its focus is on keeping those things working. And we should be thankful for that, right? I saw an analogy somewhere. The when you buy Coca-Cola, the Mexican Coke, right? We call it the Mexican Coke. Because it still comes in glass bottles and you can twist the top, right? So if you shake that bottle up, obviously it's gonna blow if you just pop the top. But for those that have had a shaken up Coke and still wanted to drink it, you will know you can kind of ease the top off a little bit and let a little bit of air out at a time. But then you got to close it real quick, because if you don't pay attention, it's gonna blow, right? It wants to open up. And you do that repeatedly, and you let some of that excess whatever out, and then you have a Coke as if you just pulled it out of the fridge, right? Your brain is like controlling that emotional cap when it comes to grief. And it doesn't always do this when it comes to everything, which I think is interesting. But it does when it comes to grief. It doesn't always do it when it comes to anger or other, powerful, secondary emotions, if you will. But with grief, for some reason, it does. And, at least oftentimes. And so it'll slowly and until it's ready to kind of really open up. And that process can really take time, and it can be so incremental. It can be so little bit of a move every time that you don't even really realize it happening until the lid is off and no big theatrics or fireworks or explosion happens. It's a survival thing. Grief can also impact you physically before it ever really impacts you mentally or emotionally. Stress, I've talked about this before, but stress is a physical response, right? Stress is not a mood. Stress is not an emotion. Stress is a physical response to, to having a need and not having the ability to meet that need, right? Basically, the kind of broken down, simple definition, right? That's stress. When you have a need or a desire and you don't have the capacity to fulfill it, you get stressed out. And grief is a form of stress, and it releases those same stress hormones in your body. You are 21 times more likely to suffer a heart attack after suffering a loss of a loved one. And it's because of those hormones that your body releases from the stress. That goes down radically in a month, and then even more in 6 months. And so sometimes you experience a loss, you experience grief, and it can mess with your stomach, right? You can get bubble guts and just not really, food ain't really sitting with you right. Being tired is very common, just drained, because it's a lot of work for your body to push all those chemicals out, right? All those hormones, I mean. And so being tired, and that kind of feeds into the whole, almost like a depression, where you don't want to get out of bed and you don't want to do anything. And the two go hand in hand, but they're not always holding hands. You may not be depressed. You may just be whooped from the stress. Being whooped from the stress for a while can lead you into a state of depression though as well. Muscle hurts, aches, right? You turn around with back pain overnight, knee pain, man, my shoulder's off, headaches, blurred vision, anxiety, it feels like your nerves are firing underneath your skin, all sorts of things. And those are physical responses to grief. It's your body, it's your brain realizing that something traumatic has happened and it needs to protect you. And that's its way of trying to protect you. Now, in the case of heart attacks, right? If you have heart issues, then yeah, it can also make you vulnerable. The way that you deal with that seems kind of cheesy, and I'm not into a lot of the kind of new age, so-called new age stuff. This isn't really new age though. This is, this dates back to when the world was populated by a handful of indigenous groups of people. There's a level of mindfulness, right? Whether you want to call it meditation, or you want to call it prayer, or you want to call it just zoning out, or whatever you want to call it. Some of those words strike us wrong because of our experiences, but centering yourself, reminding yourself of what you rationally know so that you don't get caught up, so that you help that sink in, survivor's guilt would be an example. Those of us who have been targeted, right, been, shot at or jumped or stabbed or whatever, and sometimes a homeboy doesn't make it, right? But we do. Or you're with somebody and you drive off and then they get hit and you're like, man, if I was there, I could have done something. And man, if I would have done something different when they rushed us, homeboy would have made it. It's on me. Rationally and logically, we know that 99.9% of the time, that's not true. What's going to happen is going to happen. Somebody hops out with a banger, you ain't got one, chances are someone's going to get shot, right? Like, that's just how it works. But we don't feel that truth. We still play the tape in our head, and we don't feel that truth. Mindfulness and thinking helps you with that. And so I know this is kind of all over the map a little bit. I don't script out my videos, but I try to touch on mental health among other topics. And this was interesting for me because I thought something was wrong with me for the way I responded, or the lack of the way I responded. And I've given it some days. This wasn't like yesterday. And again, I'm not in shock. And I'm sorry that the young man is gone. I'm not losing sleep over it. And that's not because I didn't care what happened to him. It's because that's just not where I'm at right now. And that may change at some point, and it may not. And either one is okay. And so I thought I'd share that with you guys. It's okay. How you grieve is okay. You want to be mindful to not get stuck. And the way that you're not stuck, again, just to repeat, is that some progress is being made. Give it like a month, Don't measure yourself day by day, hour by hour. That's because, you're going to be up and down, man. It's a roller coaster. Grief is a roller coaster sometimes. And every situation is different. You may be numb when your favorite grandparent passes and just stuck and like, I don't even know, and just kind of going through life, right? And wondering why you're not heartbroken. And yet a neighbor that you said hi to 3 times can get hit by a truck and you're crushed. Doesn't mean you love the neighbor more than you love the grandparent. It's just every situation is different. Every person is different. So don't measure yourself by other times that you've grieved. That's not fair to you, and it's not reasonable. It's not rational. That's just not how it works. And so, and I'm not just saying this because I'm saying it, right? It's a factual thing. There's research and science and data that confirms this. It's just not how it works. So give it like a month. And then check yourself and see, am I any better? And if you are, salute. And if you're not, then start looking into, hey, maybe some grief counseling might help. Go online. You can tap in with different groups and stuff online, especially, with the virus, a lot of stuff has gone virtual, and look for information from credible sources. If you're looking for some of that stuff, leave a comment on the video, and I will do my very best to connect you to some kind of resources, either online or in person, wherever in the country you're at. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, hit me on Instagram. It's the same name as the channel, The Homie Hangout, and shoot me a DM. If you're not on Instagram, you can email joshua@thehomiehangout.com. It's all very simple. And I'll be glad to try to help you. I don't have all the answers, man, but I'm about community. And as a community, this is what sometimes we need. And so anyways, I appreciate you guys. Again, check out the content. I'll link to some videos or playlists or whatever when I upload this. Look around and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're from, how you found the channel, and let's have a conversation, man. I'm the homie Joshua. This is the Homie Hangout. Help others move in excellence to help yourself at the same time, man. That's what homies do. Stay blessed.